Hello and welcome to We Need to Talk About HR. And I'm thrilled to be joined today by Tiffany Summerville. And we are coming to you live from New York, the Big Apple. And it's on the day of the big presidential debate between Harris and Trump. So there's definitely an energy in the air. It's very exciting and a gorgeous day here in New York City. Tiffany, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Felix. I'm so happy to be here. And yes, it's a very energized, there's a lot of energy in the air, and I'm so happy to be here today.
It feels like a high stakes environment.
Just a little bit. I mean, I don't know. Democracy, yeah, it's pretty high.
Yeah, democracy, the fate of the nation, the fate of the
fate
world.
of the world, right? Yeah, so.
Holy moly. Well, that's not what we're here to talk about today, although I'm pretty sure we could do a podcast on that between the two of us.
Next one, take two.
Take two. What we are here to talk about today is the sort of changing nature of the discourse and reality of diversity in the US in particular. I think we've all seen sort of a bit of a, in my opinion, a worrying trend away from dedicated resource, dedicated teams, dedicated C-level focus on improving inclusion, diversity, equity, belonging within organizations. Mm-hmm. And we're going to get into that today, which I'm really, really excited about. But Tiffany, before we jump into that, could you give listeners just a bit of a Tiffany in a nutshell, what you've done in the space, what you're passionate about in this area?
Sure. So I have actually been an HR professional for a really long time. I am much older than I look, just agree. I was originally in marketing with a publishing company in New York City, here in New York, and a friend of mine was in HR. And we would, talk about our day, and she would say, oh, the employees, they're so annoying, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, this sounds really interesting to me. And so I actually, on 4th of July, over the weekend, had made a decision that I'm going to change my career. I came in and tendered my 2-week resignation, and my boss at the time was like, do you have another job? I'm like, no, I'm changing my career. Do you have anything in mind? And I'm like, no, but it's going to work out. And so it did. I got my first role with Hermes. For those who know, I am an MVP shopper. And so that was in my opinion, God's wink, like, hey, this is a good thing that you've done. And
before you go on too much, how much of that was because you got an employee discount?
Well, I got the job first,
okay,
and that was a perk. So that's how I started my HR career, and that was in the early mid-90s, and then started working in 2000 within the life sciences, biotech industry within HR, and have been there ever since. So I've been in HR a really long time, coming close to 30 years, and about almost 25 of those years have been within the life sciences industry, industries that really make a difference in people's lives. And certainly diversity has always quite obviously been important to and for me as a woman of color, and just ingrained in me in terms of there's nothing that I can't do, even when there is a marble ceiling, that I can actually crack through that and break through that. And that was based upon some wonderful parenting. And so just been in this realm a really, really long time, and chuckle when I hear, particularly in 2020, diversity and include, DEI, and I'm like, I don't know, I've lived my life with DEI, but, I knew that there was going to be a short window of time that it wouldn't be so trendy. Right. And so that's very from my lens, and look where we are today. And we can certainly talk about the reasons for that. But, in terms of my exposure, certainly innate exposure, and then very intentional programs that I've led, award-winning programs that I've led in this space, and will continue to lead, whether it's coined DEI or whatever the new trendy name will be. So
absolutely, and does. I speak to, I have guests on who tell me, and I guess relatively new joiner in the HR space. I've been in talent acquisition HR for only last 14 years, but it definitely seems like there are waves of focus, and I wonder how do you categorize the current environment?
Well, the current environment, we're at a place where the loudest voices, and not perhaps, the voices who are, against inclusion are saying, hey, this is not right. Now, I don't know, I think it's very interesting when someone says inclusion is not right. I mean, if, that's a side eye for me. But the loudest voices are saying, oh, this is not fair. And it's like, okay, let's, rewind the tape. And the actual reason why we have to have programs in place to make sure that there is equity, right? We have to have programs in place because of systemic, all of the isms. Let's put an ism in there, right? And so that's why we have to make sure that not quota, but there are programs in place that make sure that there is a level or try to level the playing field, so that in looking at the benefits of leveling the playing field and getting in all of that richness of diversity, diversity of thought, experience, culture, all the things, right? But there has to be some kind of mechanism in place because of systemic, again, all of the isms that you put in place. And so when you remove that mechanism, then, you're really not doing your business a service. You're doing a big disservice because, studies show that businesses who are truly, truly committed to diversity, equity, I say also engagement and inclusion, they are, perform 33% better, right? So there is certainly a direct correlation to the bottom line, but how about just the right thing to do?
Yeah.
Right.
And it's it certainly feels, to me, it feels like a really obvious thing to focus on, to have an organization where you're intentionally being inclusive, where you're intentionally taking steps to welcome people in, to build in new perspectives. Why is it so? The voices that we're hearing in the media, or the voices that are out there, who, as you say, it's very loud at the moment, saying that it's not fair. If we're trying to empathize, trying to understand their perspective, why do you think it is that they're feeling the way that they are, that they're feeling that things aren't fair, and that they're being unfairly discriminated against with these kinds of programs, when the intention behind these programs is just to be inclusive to the other folks?
Sure. I think that there's a lack of education. I think that there is, an intrinsic human nature to say, perhaps if someone else has an opportunity, that means that I, may not have an opportunity. And, again, let's let's educate ourselves, and a bit of common sense. And, my grandmother, bless her soul, common sense isn't so common, but it's a matter of a feeling of something's being taken. And we know that isn't true. It's, adding to the recipe, right? So it's adding additional ingredients that can make a really beautiful dish or a beautiful meal and a beautiful outcome. And I'm always, I don't know, you probably say, why did I ask this woman? But I'm always going to be very direct. I mean, fear of perhaps someone else's insecurity and their mediocrity, those are also reasons as well. I think that, again, it's not taking away from someone. It's giving all opportunity. And, we have to really look at our intentions. Again, it's not a quota. So and that's another way people try to diminish that. A quota meaning that I'm not deserving or qualified or skilled enough to be here, when, again, in the U.S., brown women, I say brown, African American women are the ones that have a lot of education, go back for a lot of education. Yet it's like, I'm not qualified to be here. Why? Because I'm a woman, because I'm, because I'm a woman, I'm melanated, I'm, over 50. Oh, it's over 40 here, but I am actually over 50. So again, it's looking at taking away from someone because perhaps someone has an insecurity, but that's not the purpose of it. That's the unintended use in their minds of an initiative or program.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. As I think you started that concern that this sort of insecurities people have, and you started with the education piece. Mm-hmm. I was at a wedding. This sounds like it's going in a weird place, but it's not. No, I'm going somewhere with this, Tiffany.
Trust the process.
So I was at a wedding on the weekend, and my friends who are getting married, I hope they won't mind me saying, a little nerdy. And there's a behavioral psychologist called Daniel Kahneman who wrote a book called Thinking Fast and Slow. Mm-hmm. Because my friends are a little nerdy, that was one of the passages that was read out at their wedding.
Okay.
And it's a passage where he's talking about the availability of information creating bias in people's feelings. And it's talking about how there was a pretty comprehensive survey done of spouses, and they were asked to say what proportion of work they do around the house. So, who's taking the trash out more, who's doing all the cleaning up in the kitchen. And unsurprisingly, the average number between a spouse was well over 100%, because everyone always rated the amount that they were doing more than the other person.
Sure.
Because they saw 100% of the work that they're doing, and only, whatever they happen to catch their spouse doing in their moment and notice. And as you were talking about the sort of education and the sort of perceived slights, it feels like that might be a part of what's going on, is that people only see the perceived injustice being done to themselves. And they don't have that lived experience of other people who may well and do have lifetimes of having barriers put up against their own employment prospects.
Yeah, no, sure. I hear that. I'm going to say this. If you look at your circle, right? Look at your inner circle. Let's start with your inner circle. If your inner circle, everyone looks like you, that should say something to you. Let's go look, out the next rung of the circle. If that circle still only looks like you, that should tell you something. I mean, or if it's like, well, I have trickle of, other cultures or other, people of other interests in this circle. Look how that would be an enrichment to that circle. So, organizations, they're a microcosm of society, right? And so if you look at your organization and they look very homogeneous, that should be, I don't know, any CHRO.
Tells you everything you need to know. Yeah.
Any CHRO, that should, I don't know, or CEO, or anyone on the leadership team, that should, again, raise an eyebrow to say, okay, we are not diverse. Or if you're looking at, okay, well, I see a few people, so then I'm also good. I've checked a box. And it shouldn't be about checking a box. It should be about, and to be very honest with you, it really shouldn't be about, the exterior, unless, you're going for television or modeling, I don't know, entertainment, right? It should be about the skill set, which is why I think that, some people, I don't agree with this, but they'll say, let's blind resumes, right? So that hiring managers don't know, they can't make assumptions based upon a name, or they can't, right? I think that is, putting a Band-Aid on something. It's like, all right, where you can't teach somebody to be, to not to be biased, but you can, mandate that they're casting a wide net, and then having to be accountable for, if you're not going to hire someone because you can't pronounce their name, that's an issue, right? And that should be addressed, rather than saying, let me blind a resume because clearly I know that there's an issue. So what I'm saying is that if you're looking even in your own personal life, and then you're looking within whatever organization that you're working with, if everybody looks like you and you've really not thought about that, that's privilege in and of itself, by the way, to not have to think about that, right? Because, you know, I don't know, imagine you going somewhere where you're the only man, and, you know, there are a bunch of, you know, women, and, you're going to an event, you may feel a little, you know, or certainly
Absolutely,
if you're the only cisgender white male going to an event where there are a lot of, you know, brown people, right? Many of our experiences, I can tell you, you know, my experience as being the only brown person in a room at all times, you know, it's an uneasiness sometimes, right? I was just watching The View this morning, and they were talking Ketanji Brown, and they were saying how, you know, she's sitting in a room and people are thinking that she's you know, an executive assistant, and she's a Supreme Court justice, right? So what's happening here, right? And so again, I have people. I'm going to tell you, Felix, like, look at when you're going back to the office, or you're going. If you look around and everybody looks like you, I mean, to me, that would say, perhaps we need to have some sort of plan in place for some diversity.
Hey, you and I are singing from the same hymn sheet on this one, Tiffany. But I'm interested in. I think there's this. You said a word. You mentioned sort of discomfort. Mm-hmm. I think it's a really powerful. I think it's a really powerful word for a couple of reasons. I think first of all, talking about some of these topics is uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. It's hard. It's hard for everyone. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean we shouldn't do it, right. And that's why I'm so excited that you're on the show today and we're having this sort of really candid conversation. Mm-hmm. But I also think that a lot of us folks, and I'm definitely putting myself in the us category here, Tiffany, of who have led very privileged lives in a number of different ways, we're so not used to being uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. And that sort of lived experience that you just spoke about, being, you know, the only woman of color in in an organization. Mm-hmm. You know, just taking a second to visualize that, it's, and I'm not saying this is the first time I've done this, but it's always uncomfortable to think about that. I just think sometimes maybe reveling in the discomfort and seeing that there's a positive to understanding that, I think, is something that's positive. And you spoke about some of those voices that are being very loud right now, and I think maybe some of that loudness also comes from not liking being put in a place of discomfort. And, you know, there's a bit of it that's just like, just get over it. Other people have had that in their lives for ages, and this is just the reality.
No, absolutely. Listen, if you live long enough, you're going to have discomfort. And by that, I mean, when you come out of the womb, you're going to have discomfort. I mean, that's life. But there are certain folks that have an extra layers of discomfort that others may not even consider. And so I will also say that, you know, I have lived a relatively privileged life myself, right, in some areas. So I think that then perhaps there's an assumption. I'll give an example. Someone had, I was having a conversation with a colleague, and the person said, hey, you know, I want to, get connected with more HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities, and, you know, because of the underprivileged. And I said, okay, that's great, but I'm going to share with you that I'm a proud graduate of an HBCU, Bowie State University, one of the 8th oldest historically Black colleges and universities in America. And I promise you, I was not underprivileged. I was actually a private school girl. You know, I've gone to how many countries a month. So I'm, you know, the socioeconomics don't associate that with, because I'm melanated, that I've come from underprivileged, I'm underprivileged. So I think that and he was like, oh, you're right. Like, I didn't think about that. I didn't scold him. I just said, hey, let me just stop you right here. And so it was an honest dialogue that he and I had, and I educated him on something that he was unaware of. And you want to have that dialogue. The dialogue is so important. The initiatives that I've built from a DEI perspective have really been based on having open dialogue, open, honest conversations to say, hey, here's my experience, but it's not my job just to be cathartic about the things that have happened, blah, blah, blah. Have open conversations and awareness. It's about awareness. But I think that we can move the needle more if we have those open conversations in safe spaces to say, I'm chastising you, but let me just kind of correct you on this. Sure. You know what I mean? Like, let me just kind of correct you because I don't want you, and I don't want you thinking that. That's, very, just inaccurate way of thinking. But I think it's a great example of just having that dialogue, right? So.
No, it totally is. And I'm really glad that you've circled us back to these, to the programs that you've run. Because I'd love if you'd be happy sharing some of the successes that you've had in this space, because I think it's all very well talking about the theory, but
sure.
What are we going to do about it?
Yeah, so for me, it's very much, providing opportunities for folks to have open dialogue. And how do you spark that dialogue? Okay, let's, talk about whether it's a current event. So I'll give an example. I had a discussion on coded bias, and there's a great Netflix documentary on coded bias, and I reached out to the producer, and so I said, hey, can you come and talk to my team, my organization? She was willing to do that, but before getting to the producer coming, I had said, hey, team, let's watch the documentary. You can watch it on your own, or we can have time to watch it together. And then we kind of go through, like, what did you feel about that? What were your thoughts on that? Having these open discussions. And one of the things that I had shared with that particular discussion was that, hey, this was in 2020 this was in 21 when we had this, but in 2020 when COVID hit and we had all of the, you walk up to the thermometer to scan your face. Right in front of my office, there was one of those machines, and it could not scan me. So I'm bouncing around and I'm looking at every now and again, it might scan me. And I'm like, what the heck is this? But even going to, an automatic faucet, quite oftentimes it doesn't register. Why? Because most of the test cases that were built into the AI were I think it's like 90-something, 92%, between maybe 86 and 92% white males that they were using the data to build into AI.
Oh my gosh.
So if you think about that, just from it's coded bias. And so we had those discussions, and something so small where it's like, oh my goodness, you don't think about these things, right? And then I had the producer come in, and we had a Q&A. Again, just being able to have discussions. We've had discussions about because we had locations in the UK, from the UK experience. And I think so. It's just having open dialogue where people can say, I never thought about it that way, or, intersectionality. I never thought about it that way. And especially with my team, when I would come out and say, listen, I have certain privileges that, even acknowledging to hear people, for people to hear me say that. I think that, again, it just sparks conversation. It connects. I think we're more connected than we are different. Yeah. But, really having these very difficult conversations, and of course, we set to have the ground, the house rules. It's not easy, though, Felix. It's really not easy. Sometimes I would walk away very frustrated, and my team would walk away very frustrated as well, because it would sometimes become more incumbent upon the I guess the minority having to do most of the talking, and it's like this cathartic therapy session, and everybody just like being very quiet and just watching us. And I said, we're not doing that. We need everyone to get in and talk, and we need everyone. So we break off in small groups. So there are little things that you can do to spark conversation. But I think just having the open dialogue and saying, hey, this is a safe space and we're going to be respectful, but understand that this is a space by which we can come in and have discussions and, hey, think about things a little differently.
What would you say then, in your ideal world, are the kind of mindsets that people should approach those conversations with? If you could reprogram people's brains before they came into those sessions.
Seek understanding. My mentor is a 76-year-old Italian woman, okay? And she and I have the open dialogue, and I often say to her, like, I'm so interested to understanding, like, give me stories about how you were raised. I just don't understand, like, your view on things. It's different. So I want to understand. And so we have discussions all the time, like just being able to seek understanding and say, hey, I'm open. I'm not going to come talk to you, Tiffany, or whomever, put in that person and, fill in the blank as though, you're in the zoo when I'm coming and I need you to entertain me. But I'm really trying to seek understanding because, my world has been very myopic. And I want to, kind of adjust the lens and open up and be able to see more and to experience more.
And, for me, you and I come from, it's another part of our privilege, I think. We come from incredibly international cities, right?
Right.
You live in New York,
Sure.
I live in London.
Sure.
And I'll speak for myself here because that's what I can do. But I seek that out. Right? I love the richness of people from different countries, different religions, backgrounds, all the rest of it. And I think for me, that's what makes people interesting. And that's what I hope that people bring to conversations that we have in my business, Instant Impact.
Sure.
I hope that they bring a sort of curiosity and, dare I say, enjoying the conversation a little bit, enjoying learning about someone else's lived experience and how they see the world. But it does feels like that's a tall order sometimes.
Well, I think I just think it's based upon the human being and, again, seeking understanding. I will say that, like I said, I grew up in private schools where I was the only brown person in the class and so forth. When I was very young, my best friend at the time, she said out of her mouth, like, her father was a bigot. But Tiffany, myself and my family, we were okay. And like, we were the okay. She stayed over with us all the time because we were safe brown people. I don't know what that is. Right. And so, when I had my daughter, like, her nursery school was so diverse, also private. And for me, it was very important. First of all, she was going to go to a private school, and, no offense. And I know, I don't know, people don't like to hear that because it's like public school system. My daughter was going to go to private school because that's what I knew, but I was very intentional. She went to an international private school, and 172 children in the school from kindergarten to 12th grade. She had 20 students in her graduating class, but I threw her a big 18th birthday party, and I'm in the ballroom, and I'm looking at, like, all her friends. And when I say Felix, I mean every nationality, every culture, religion. That was her friend. Like,
That's awesome.
And I was like, I guess I did something right. If not one thing, I did one thing right. And, my daughter's been to almost 30 countries, and she's 24 years old. It was an international school, so part of the curriculum was to travel.
Wow, really?
Yeah. I mean, even if you don't, so they would learn about a culture and a country, and they would travel. And even if you didn't, you as a parent made a commitment to travel with your child too. So it was just very, very heavy. when she went to Japan, I was like, my daughter's always had such an affinity towards the Asian culture, even when she was a toddler.
Really?
And when she went to Japan, she's like, just want to stay here. And I'm like, you're coming home.
There's no way, literally no
You're
way
coming
you're
back
staying there.
home. But anyway, but the beauty of that, and think of the privilege from her lens too, right? To be able to experience other people's culture on their soil. That also opens up your mind very differently too, and that makes you more accepting, and again curious about other folks.
Certainly does. Now, I am just a little aware of time.
Mm-hmm.
I just feel like we'd be doing ourselves a disservice at this really critical time for the country, for the world, if we didn't do a bit of future gazing.
Okay.
What are your, particularly around this topic around how businesses approach diversity? What are your hopes for the realistic hopes for the I don't know, next 4 years?
Sure.
Seems appropriate.
I would love for there to be, quite honestly, perhaps in law, a policy that says that organizations must, especially those who receive grants, and that's even beyond, an affirmative action plan, which, in the U.S., if you are a company that is 50 employees or more and you receive federal contracts and so forth, you are required to report on your, it's called an affirmative action plan, showing just all the demographics within and your span in terms of your recruitment and so forth. But again, just to mandate that companies are, make efforts towards diversity. And again, not a box, checking a box, which is why I added that engagement into, DE, adding the additional E. Because if you hire folks, if you think you're checking a box, so I hired someone that, I don't know, they're, a brown person or, it's a woman. Oh gosh, I just hired a woman. That's good. But if you're not engaging those folks, if you're not including those folks, if you're not looking at your processes that may be biased and you're not even aware of that bias, right? Then you have folks, you're further traumatizing people, to be quite honest. And so just being more intentional and understanding the beauty and the richness that it will add to the bottom line of your organization by having diversity of experience and thought. I think that that's important. And honestly, however it's coined, it used to be, affirmative action, that would call it. Then affirmative action actually slowly, if you turned into DEI and to make it easier for, more comfortable for other folks, whatever you coin it, just make sure that we are having those that at the very least, our customer base, our organizations even look like our customer base, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so, but there's so many benefits of being more inclusive, more benefits than not.
And look, I guess when there's a palpable benefit that organizations aren't seeing themselves, I guess that's where legislation can be helpful, or where, if government can control what they can control, they can choose who they're giving money to. And
well, it's all about the money, right?
Interesting.
But you got to make sure that, again, it's from the even if you're a private organization, that bottom line is going to be enriched, just for the same reasons why you want your employee experience. Why do people try to get on best companies? That's to help with recruitment, because you want to get more workers to come in if they're happy. Those are the same things. That's part of it. Mostly in your employee surveys, you're talking about, in the U.S. anyway, we're talking about, and I did this when I was for the U.K.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're talking about that, like people, especially, Gen Z. They're not going to put up with some of the things that certainly, our parents put up with, and certainly what they're like.
They know they've got opinions.
They're like and they're not afraid to tell you about it.
No, you're
You better do
right.
right.
Well, let's hope so, and I'd be interested. So that's what you'd love to see.
I would.
Where are you on the hopeful, despairing scale? How likely do you think it is? Well, I guess actually, let's see what happens in November.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So, all right, see what happens in November in terms of really being intentional about it from a policy perspective. But, I'm very optimistic, and certainly if I'm the CHRO of an organization, it's going to happen. I mean, that's what's going to be. I'm going to make sure that there's diversity because I know how, like I said, that's going to have a great impact on your bottom line. And so that's what I'm hoping for, executive leaders, CEOs and so forth being committed to this and saying, hey, I want to make sure that we are the best and the brightest and whatever that looks like.
Yeah.
The best and the brightest, right?
Amen to that. I can't think of a better note to finish on. Tiffany, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Felix. I feel like I've been rambling, and hopefully this was good for you. But it's beautiful, like it's just beautiful to just like being at my daughter's 18th birthday party, being able to step back and look and see all of the differences and how it brings us together. That's a beautiful thing.
And there are not many things that you can change for the better in your lifetime, but this feels like one of the ones that we can all be a part of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
How's that for a positive note?